Hi there, folks, and welcome to Offensive Umbraco, aka my very first conference talk. Never thought I'd be speaking at a Codegarden, but life is weird, and here we are. For those who don't know me, I'm Stephen. I currently work as a security analyst at Quorum Cyber. I have a focus on offensive security, hence the title of this talk. I'll talk about what offensive security is shortly. Previously, I worked as a developer with the lovely folks at Intelligent Mobile, and that's where I gained all of my Umbraco experience. We built a lot of really cool Umbraco solutions. We did a lot of bespoke back office extension, integrated Umbraco with lots of third-party systems and APIs, and really just pushed Umbraco to its limit. For people who care about certifications and acronyms and stuff, I've got those. So what do I actually mean when I talk about offensive security? So it's an approach to security where we take on the role of a threat actor, an attacker, hacker, whatever you want to call them. We carry out real attacks on systems using the same tools and techniques that real attackers might use, or at least a good approximation. Of course, within an agreed scope, as in development, scope is very important in offensive security, mainly so that we don't end up attacking systems that we're not supposed to, potentially doing illegal things. We also don't actively want to try and bring customer networks down, although things have happened. So I may have some stories about that later on. But the end goal of any good offensive security engagement is better defenses, right? So we're not just attacking these systems for the hell of it. We provide reports at the end with repro steps, recommendations for how to fix issues. The end result is that if customers fix those issues, they are better protected overall. Sometimes they don't, but oh well. A big part of offensive security is what's known as adversary mindset, and it means looking at things from the perspective of an attacker and thinking, how can I use this to meet my objectives? The thing that we're looking at could be anything really. Doesn't have to be a web application or server. It could be a human being. So maybe we're doing some social engineering, maybe we're doing phishing. Physical penetration testing is a thing as well. So maybe we're trying to get into a building. So it's not always about finding and exploiting technical vulnerabilities in code. Sometimes we're leveraging existing features and expected functionalities of a system in order to meet the goal, what's maybe known as feature abuse or misuse. And this is where offensive security can get really fun, where you need to come up with creative and weird and wonderful ways to break things. So what I want to do is apply some of this thinking towards Umbraco. So I'll be doing a few live demos just to live on the edge. The demo environment looks something like this. On the right, we've got a web server 2019 IS10 standard Umbraco 8.13, so not the very latest and greatest, but fairly recent. The starter kit's on there just for something to have there, with a really horrible back office extension that I developed for this presentation. On the left, we've got the attack server. Ubuntu Linux, nothing really special about it. It's got a C2 framework installed on it. If you don't know what C2 is, I'll explain that later on. Both servers have domains pointing at them, valid SSL certificates. It's as realistic as I could really be bothered to make it. Before anyone tries to go to any of those domains, they are firewalled to just myself. But go ahead and take a pop at them if you like. I'd be very impressed if you get into them. Please tell me how to do it. So on offensive security engagements, it's always a good idea to have a scenario, set out some objectives. What are we actually trying to do? In this instance, my scenario is, okay, I'm an attacker. I've got an Umbraco editor login somehow. Maybe I brute forced it. Maybe credentials were leaked somewhere. Fact is, I've got access to it. You might call this kind of engagement assume breach, whereby you assume that an attacker has compromised your system and they've already got a low privilege account within that system. So our objectives in this situation are to get access to an admin account, so we want to escalate privileges, and we also want to gain command of the underlying server by deploying a C2 implant. So first thing the attacker is going to do after they get access to your CMS, they're going to start trying to gather information about what it is they've actually got access to. So some of the questions we're going to try and answer is what role are we? We know in this case that we've got an editor role, but what actual capabilities does that give us? What sections can we see? What content nodes can we see? And so on. What data do we have access to? Is there anything sensitive there? Maybe credentials for other systems, so opportunities for lateral movement, API keys, email addresses, whatever. Anything that can help us move beyond our current environment and our current situation. What version of Umbraco are we on? Is it a vulnerable version? Is there any publicly disclosed vulnerabilities that we can exploit to meet our objectives? In this case, no, I don't think so. 13 thinks quite clean. What packages are installed? Again, are any of those vulnerable? We might even, based on what packages are installed, we may even go looking at those for undisclosed vulnerabilities at 0 days and try and exploit those. How has the back office been extended? Is there any custom sections, property editors, dashboards, any kind of bespoke closed source kind of extensions are likely to be a good target for finding vulnerabilities. Can we deploy to other environments? So is there anything like Umbraco deploy or usync or usync complete, whereby we can maybe deploy things from a staging to a live environment? And if so, maybe there's a potential there for lateral movement to other environments. So most of that can probably just be figured out just by navigating around the back office and seeing what's there visually in front of you. While you're navigating around the back office, just keep the network tab open in your browser and see what requests are going back and forth and what static assets are being loaded. That can be a really good indication of what packages are installed or any custom extensions that have been made to the back office. Server variables is a good thing to look at. This is a global JavaScript variable that the back of Umbraco sets when you log into Umbraco settings could be interesting. Umbraco URLs as well. So if a developer has created a custom extension, they may have added their API URLs to server variables, and that might give you an idea of things to target. So the first objective that we have in our scenario is to move from an editor account to an admin account, which is known as privilege escalation, basically getting more privileges than you already have. So this brings us to our first demo. This is a vulnerable back office extension that I've developed for this presentation. It's to do with a PDF export feature. It allows editors to generate PDFs of something. Plenty of reasons why that functionality might be available. Maybe e-commerce sites where editors want to be able to pull off reports of sales or invoices, something like that. But in this case, our PDF is generated from an HTML template which the editor has control over. So I'm going to take a look at this. So I'm going to switch, and I hope you see it. If not, I'm sure someone will tell me. So I'm going to log into my back office as an editor user. Hopefully my demos work. Yeah. So got the standard Umbraco sections for editors, but I've got this additional section here for reports, and very just generic. There's no, I've not made this realistic at all, but click a button, generates a PDF. Doesn't really have anything in it, and there should be some dynamic content in it. So use your imagination, could be anything. The report is generated server-side from an HTML template, which the editor has control over. If you've got any features like this whereby something is getting generated server-side based on HTML, always check to see if JavaScript is getting executed within that HTML. So I can edit the template here, and remember I'm an editor user, so what I'm going to do is just put a simple script in there that writes some text out to the page. Save that, and then I'll export my report again. And the text gets written out to the page. So what that tells me is that my JavaScript gets executed, and it gets executed server-side. Although it's getting executed server-side, it's still getting executed within a headless browser, so it's still client-side JavaScript, so it's server-side, client-side code execution, if you can get your head around that. One really cool payload to try and use in this situation looks something like this. Plant a little script in there. It makes a JavaScript XML HTTP request, but it makes it to the file protocol and to a file on the file system. Once it gets that file, it places the contents of it within this HTML element. Granted, you will need to know the location of the file you're looking for, but that can be determined with trial and error or just determination. So in this case, I'm going to try and read the web config of my site. So copy that, go back to my template, drop it in, save it, export my PDF, and hopefully, and my resulting PDF has full contents of my web config. So as an editor user, I've exploited a feature that's been offered to me by the developers to be able to customize my PDF templates, and I've used that to read the web config on the server, which as an editor user, we should not be able to do. So as you know, the web config contains all sorts of interesting configuration settings. Could find anything in there really. Credentials for other systems, so allowing us to move to other environments, API keys, that kind of thing. Of course, the big one is your database connection string. So you might try and connect directly to the database. Hopefully it's firewalled. I hope mine is firewalled because someone will be trying to log into it right now. SMTP settings. So if someone gets access to your SMTP server, they can masquerade as your business. Web config, yeah, it's just something you don't want people to be able to access. So in this case, my DB server is firewalled, so an attacker probably won't be able to just connect directly to it. But maybe this guy here, Stephen, maybe he's just been a lazy admin, and maybe he's just used the same password for his Umbraco CMS login as his database. So let's just try it, see what happens. And of course, yeah, Steve's been a lazy admin. He's used the same password, and effectively what that's allowed us to do is escalate our privileges from an editor user by exploiting a vulnerable feature in the CMS. and getting some information that's allowed us to log in as an admin. Cool. So let's go back to presentation. Right. So we've managed to meet our first objective, which was to escalate our privileges to an admin user. Let's go to our next one. So we'll need to leverage code execution. Code execution is all about getting, so for an attacker, it's about getting their malicious code to execute within the target application. And Umbraco, it's C#, so we're gonna want to get code into one of those locations. Because we're an admin, that's trivial, right? So we can probably upload packages. Packages can contain templates, DLLs, whatever. We can create and edit views. Razor views can contain C# code. So as an admin user, that's trivial. There are other ways towards code execution as well. Last year, I wrote about a file upload vulnerability, which was on the Umbraco site, and that would have allowed it was due to a lack of validation of a file upload, which would have allowed an executable file to be uploaded into one of those previous locations. Yeah, and then there's other things as well, like supply chain attack. Maybe someone's compromised your GitHub repos or build servers, and they can sneak code in that way. So it's not all just about having direct admin access to the back office. There are other routes towards getting code execution. Code execution is the kind of the ultimate thing that we're usually trying to find when we're doing penetration tests, because it is the most damaging kind of vulnerability. Closely related to that is command execution. So this is about actually executing commands on the underlying operating system, so as opposed to executing code within the application. We're going deeper into the server, but we actually leverage code execution to get there. .NET Framework provides us the features to do that. So combining those two concepts, we can come up with a payload that looks something like this. This is the kind of thing that an attacker will look to drop into a Razor view after gaining access to the CMS or whatever other means they've got to sneak code into Razor views. So we make use of .NET's system diagnostics process that enables us to create processes on the underlying server. The process we create is CMD, it's Windows command prompt. We pass it the command that gets passed within a query string. So without that query string, nothing will happen on the page. So we check for the query string, and if it's not there, we don't do anything. So the site will still operate as normal unless that query string is specified. Some other things we do is we tell it not to create a window on the server. So you know, if someone's logged into the server, they don't see a flash of a command prompt. We redirect the standard output because we want to get that, and then we get the standard output and just display it on the page. The other thing we do is we wrap the entire thing in a try catch with an empty catch block. Empty catch, frowned upon in development best practices. Whenever you're creating malicious payloads, you'll want to stay out of the Umbraco trace log. So an empty catch helps us to do that. So it just says, you know, if there's an error, just continue on as if nothing happened. So it's a way of staying kind of hidden. Well, actually, let's demo this. Look at that. Back to my admin account that I had before. Close those tabs. And I'm just going to drop that into the master template. So, oh, it's already there because I practiced this earlier, so we're all good. Let's go to the front end of the site. everything's functioning as normal. So end users of the site don't notice anything different. But if we specify query string cmd, just simple command, maybe PMI, and we get the output of that command. So we know that the website is running under IIS app pool user demo site. And then we can just use that to start enumerating information about the underlying server, do system info, see what hotfixes are installed. Maybe there's a public vulnerability we can use to exploit the server. So yeah, that's the basic concept of a web shell. So back to the presentation. Couple issues with the web shell approach. We're dropping a big, ugly, suspicious code block into a Razor view. That's, if a back office user goes and looks at that view, they're going to get suspicious. If someone does a web deploy or continuous integrations in place and they do deployment, the view might get overwritten, so we get wiped out. It's noisy, requires repeated requests to execute multiple commands. We end up in the IIS logs. I believe that web application firewalls will probably pick this kind of thing up as well, like Windows commands being sent in query strings is pretty suspicious. So because of that, web shells are kind of used as a first stage of a payload, and they're usually used as a springboard to further attacks on the server. So in our case, what we'll do is we'll leverage the web shell in order to deploy a command and control implant. This brings us to the next section. So command control scenario, the attacker has a server known as a C2 server, and that's where they control one or more target devices. It could be servers, personal computers, or whatever. Once the C2 server is set up, the attacker will look to deploy what are known as implants to those servers or to those targets. And once the implants are running, they'll beacon back to the C2 server and they'll ask if, have you got any commands for me? And they'll send the results of those commands back to the server. Lots of different C2 frameworks. Some are open source, some are paid. You might have heard of Cobalt Strike's probably the most well-known one. But recently I've been playing around with a C2 framework called POSH-C2, which is an open source C2 framework. So the last demo is to deploy a POSH-C2 implant. So I'm going to switch over to my attack server at this point. So I've already got POSH-C2 set up. I won't go over install and configure that there. I've already done it. And what I'm going to do is just start my POSH-C2 server. And what POSH-C2 does is it builds a bunch of different implants for different target operating systems and architectures and all sorts of things. What I'm going to do is just grab this PowerShell one-liner. This is just a big base64 encoded PowerShell script, which allows it to be passed in something like a query string, for example. But yeah, it's got lots of different implants. Which you choose will depend on what kind of target you've got. So what I do with POSH-C2 usually is on the left I'll have the server log, and on the right I'll have the POSH-C2 client, and that's where I can interact with the implants that connect back. So whenever an implant connects back, we'll see some activity on the left, and then the right is where I can interact with it. So taking that PowerShell one-liner, I'll just drop that into my CMD query string parameter. And if I go back to my C2, I can see new implant connected. If I hit enter on the right, I can see that implant. So every implant gets an ID. You can see some information about it, like process ID, the user it's running under, the server name, etc. And to interact with that, just type his ID, and then I can start running commands on the server via the implant. So POSI2 has lots of different modules, things like I can screenshot of the server, I can get keystrokes of the server, do something that's just like PS, just to get a list of the processes running on the server. On the left, you should see that command executed and then coming back with a result. So if you can run, and I can run this again and get like another implant over here. So if you imagine this is a C2 server, maybe you've got an entire network of computers under your control. They would all appear here, and you can control them all, send commands to multiple ones at the same time. So I think I'm going to start running out of time, so let's go back to this. Talking about defenses, so as I said before, any good offensive engagement aims to improve defenses. Some specific recommendations from the examples that I showed in this talk are back office features and permissions. So thinking back to the PDF export, like think, does an editor need to be able to do that? Think about if you're providing a feature to an editor, you might be providing the same features to attackers who have compromised that. Apply adversary mindset to everything. Anything could be a potential route to compromise. Do penetration tests, code reviews, all that good stuff. File and folder permissions is a really good way to prevent code execution. So prevent writing to bin folder, view folder, and things. Of course, some people do edit templates and manage packages in the back office on their sites. So in that case, you might want to implement stricter controls in other areas. Application pools. Use a separate application pool user for each website. You don't want to, if one website gets compromised, you don't want the rest of them to get compromised. And of course, there's security is such a broad topic. There's lots of different areas. You might have heard of defense in depth. What it refers to is implement security controls across lots of different areas. Don't rely on any one control to protect you against attacks. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for if you've made it this far. Thanks for listening. I hope you've learned something. I didn't think I was going to run out of time so quickly, so I rushed the end. But I'll be kicking about all day. Find me on Twitter, Unconference. But yeah, thank you and happy hacking.